remember I was only about 5 years old. Uh, we had a rain, and there's a little creek down there. They called it a branch, but it was flooding, and they had a little bridge across it there. And one of the fellows had a dog there, and he threw him in above the bridge. He had to go under the water. It was lapping right up on the bridge, and that I remembered that. That was something. He come out on the other side just fine. And I remember going to, well, down there in those days, kids had to learn to work. I had to go to the cotton patch with them at that age. I had a flour sack that I picked cotton in, and they even had a little red wagon. I remember that. But that's all I remember right up till the time that we left Texas. But we had my granddad had a Model T touring car that didn't even have a top on it. And they had two Model T Ford trucks that hauled our stuff in, camping equipment, everything. It took us 2 weeks to get up here with us. But I remember there, we crossed the Red River and set up camp there. And we could see across the river, there's a couple of guys coming down there, horseback, to water their horses at the river. And we was wondering if those were bandits or desperados or what. And the next thing on the trip was when we come up Raton Pass, there's an old, I think it was a Nash squad truck, had solid rubber tires, chain drive. They were just creeping along, going up that pass. Well, it had to be the Model T Ford Passage. And then when we come over Battle Mountain, Wayman and I, we were sitting out on top of one of these trucks at bed there, and we sitting up there watching the world go by. Well, my dad's sister and brother lived out here in Rio Blanco County, and
Your name?
Les Johnson and Bessie Cooey was a sister. He got a job grubbing brush over there in the Ryan's Gulch, and we were camped there at Bardee School. Had tents, a couple of tents. From there, we went to what they call the Foot Place, the ranch there on Lower Piance Creek. We were there about a year, and Whitney and I was the only kids going to school. You know, we went to a one-room schoolhouse. There was about maybe 10 kids altogether. It's first grade through the eighth. Virgie and Beverly were born in Colorado, to the West Rifle Creek. Dad leased a ranch over there. It's the Upper Harris Ranch, they called it. We were there 2 years. And I was about 8 years old then. And I was running the stacker team, on the head. From there back down the Piance Creek at the Love Ranch. That's across from the Rock Schoolhouse. There, we lived there 2 years, and Winnie and I guess Pat and we went to school there. I graduated from that school.
Okay.
In 8th grade. And I remember my brother Wayman and we went up what they call the Pearson place up Fun Creek, or Love's Hay, and we were gone about 2 weeks. First time I'd ever been away from home. Boy, I got homesick. And they had one of these wind-up photographs, and I like to drove them crazy playing that. They rented a house out in the Antlers district, and for that reason, Gladys and Edith could go to high school. And so we lived there. They moved our stuff, the team wagon, and I had to take the team back, wagon back to the ranch. I left Rifle early in the morning, just went up Rifle Creek and over the Upper Piens Creek, and they had a hotel there at the Rio Blanco store down in just across the creek toward Rifle. I stayed overnight there, but the guy that run the hotel, he had to come and help me unhook the team and put them away. And next morning he got them in and harnessed them and hooked them up. And I took off down the Piens Creek. That's about 20 miles in one day. There, it took me 2 days.
That's quite, what, about 9? You were about
Yeah, 9 years old.
9 years old. That's quite a responsibility.
Well, things are different in those days. 9-year-old kid today wouldn't know which end was up.
And not expected to either.
No,
No. You were born in what year?
1917.
1917. There was and so that means that you were 4 years old, 5 years old when the family came to
I think it's
Colorado.
1923.
1923.
Because Pat was a baby then. He was born December the 4th, the year before we came out the next summer. So like he said, he come to Piens Creek wearing diapers and he's still there. Moved from the Love Ranch up to PL. About 9 teams in the hayfield when we went there. In the last year I helped hay there, there wasn't a horse in the field. It was all modern machinery. But Wayman and I, we used to do all the hunting. We went up on the mountain. And of course we kept the family in meat. I'm not telling what we was hunting. The deer in the summertime, they were up on what we call the mountain. It's up in the high country there. They had Willow Creek.
Did you eat game all year round? I mean,
When it was edible.
Okay.
And Mom canned a lot of it.
Okay.
The part that you couldn't fry, or roast, she'd can it in half-gallon jars. And that tastes pretty good along in February and March, April. The winter that I was supposed to start to school, I was 6 years old. My dad filed on a homestead up West Stewart. Mom and us kids lived up there. It's 15 miles from Pianos Creek Road. Never, maybe a cowboy would go by, we'd see him horseback. He's a quarter of a mile away when he went by. But Gladys and Wayman took turns. We had an old horse they called Prince. They'd go to the mailbox once a week or sometimes twice a week. My dad drove the mail for Bob Reagan, mail contract, and Dad would bring the groceries and put in this big mailbox he had. All of the ranches had big mailboxes, so put groceries in.
Oh, okay.
And we melted snow in the winter for water. Well, we built that log cabin. It was what was supposed to be a 2-room, but it's all open space inside. So they put up sheets on a wire to divide the rooms. Well, we didn't have no business in town. We didn't know what to do when we got there. Yeah, as we grew up, they had a rodeo in Meeker, but that was in the later years after we had transportation. But Meeker has always had a 4th of July rodeo. They are overdoing it now. They stretch it to about 3 or 4 days. Gladys's husband's father, maybe you saw those pits where the oil shale they dug out like this, well, his assessment claims.
Right.
He did that. But I married Rex's mother in 1939, I guess. Rex was born in 1940. And they went to Wichita. That was World War II. I went to Wichita, went to work for Boeing Airplane Company. Started out, well, I went in and applied for a job. When I went in for my interview, the guy said, "You wouldn't like that kitchen, would you?" I said, "Well, I probably didn't have any choice." But he said, "How about sweeping floors, cleaning up around the machines?" I said, "Well, that sounds good to me." And I said, "You can transfer, can you?" And he said, "Not for 6 months." I guess. And when the 6 months was up, I'd transferred 3 times.
B-17s?
B-29, B-17s, they were European theater, and the B-29s was Pacific Japanese War. Yeah, there's Cessna and Beechcraft, and they built that little remote control plane there. I forget now what they call it, but transferred into the assembly line was building those primary trainers. Double wing, there's Navy and Marines and Air Force. It's all the same one, only marked different. And I worked there, I forget now how long, but one day the guy come in, he'd go talk to a guy, and he'd pick up his toolbox and go over to the foreman's desk. And I happened to be one of them. There's 21 of us. And we went into a room there, and The guy said, I suppose you guys want to know what this is all about. And we said, yeah, we were kind of curious. I said, we picked you 21 guys to go down to Plant 2 to start hanging engines, so B-29. So it's strictly night shift from there on.
Okay. So you were how many, 30 cylinders or something like that on one of those engines, or
24.
24? And that's probably in 2 rows.
Yeah.
Amazing airplane.
I got quite a thrill when the first time I started the engines on one of those. It's more to it than just turn the switch. That was about the time that Rex's mother and I were having problems, and I quit and come back to Colorado, and I went to work on the ranch for the Square S outfit, and I went from there up to the PL. My brother was running it, the ranch end of it there then. Well, that was before I went to Wichita. I went up above Meeker there on a ranch for a while before I went to Wichita.
What when you came back from Wichita, what year was that?
45.
45. So the war was all but done.
Yeah.
And where were you when they dropped the atomic bomb?
I was working for Boeing.
And how did they?
Boy, that was quite a... They announced it over the loudspeakers in the plant there, and everybody just hollered and shouted.
Well, it's one of the airplanes you
Help build.
you know was in the. Johnny had a earth moving company. He built runways and dirt dams, and isn't that right?
Yeah, most of the work was done for Equity Oil Company. I run a cat there for a number of years. And then, well, we built dams, built that dams down there at Pienz Creek, the mouth of Pienz Creek, as well as up the Rio Blanco Lake, they call it. I run one of those big rubber-tired scrapers.
I remember that. We'd come to visit, and he was out dozing and dirt scraping,
Yeah.
moving dirt to
Yeah.
build that out there. And my goodness, I wasn't very old.
That dam at the widest spot, it's come up, it was 150 feet wide.
Oh, the width of it, that's,
It'd come up to, I think it's 10 foot or 12 foot top.
that's a lot of dirt.
Yeah. And they built locations for oil company and built roads. I even went out into Utah and built a couple of locations not very far from Cisco. Yeah, Rex was that P-2V squadron out of Oak Harbor, Washington. Mom and I went up there to bring his car back when he went to Japan. And while we were there, the Blue Angels put on an air show. It was really interesting. That was getting close to 40 years ago.
And this passes pretty quick.
Yeah.
You look back, I'm 52.
Well, Pat Rex was born in 40, so he's 66, 31st July. Well, I married a lady down in Texas, was down there about 5 years, and she died of heart problems. And I come back to Colorado then, and met and married Margaret. And every winter we would go down to visit my cousin and his wife, Haskell Bohr. They lived in Corpus. We went down there 8 years in a row.
Nice down there. You wintered down there.
Well, we'd spend 2 or 3 months there. And we went up to Galveston. Galveston was one of the hardest hit hurricane centers in Texas. And some of the old forts and things, visited all over
All up the coast there.
all over there, and we made one trip down the Great Bend, or Big Bend, Texas. I wanted to go back. There was more I wanted to see, but I never made it.
Well, that King Ranch is down there.
Yeah,
That's quite an outfit.
yeah, you drive for miles and miles to get across it. Well, I worked for John Deere outfit for down there out of Kingsville and Corpus. We've gone out on that King Ranch. My boss and I went out there one day, out to their headquarters, and they had one of these oil drums, 55-gallon oil drum there, and it liked about that much being full of rattlesnake rattles. And they killed the rattlesnakes and cut the rattles off, and they'd bring them in and put them in that barrel. That's a lot of rattlers.
That's a lot of snakes.
You wouldn't believe it, but that Corpus Christi Bay froze over. It killed a lot of the palm trees and killed the fish. And those Mexicans, they had a killing on those fish. They go out there and get it by the tub full. Well, I've been across it both ways, from El Paso east and went into top end and down to Brownsville. Made several trips there, down into Old Mexico. The stepdaughter's husband was a Texas Ranger, and his brother was a highway patrolman. We went down there one time. We had two law officers escorting us, but they didn't have any power in Mexico.
Right. But that's pretty good. They knew the terms.
Oh yeah.
That was in the last 20 years. Yeah.
Well, it was last 25.
Last 25 years.
See, Margaret and I have been married 20 years the 9th of May. She was a Norwegian. Her parents both came from Norway. But I didn't realize it at the time, but her and my mother had a lot of the same characteristics. She said it didn't matter how bad someone was, there was always a little good in them. We were out to Edith's here in Denver, Mom and I, and she had a litter of pups. She tried to sell them for $50 a piece. And I said, no, I wouldn't pay that for them. But before we left, she said, well, I'll just give you one of them. I said, you go down and pick out the one you want. I went down the basement. This is in the wintertime. I went down there, and all of them but one dashed and went under the bed. And this one come to me, and that's the one I took.
Smart dog, too.
Yeah. Well, when we go driving in the car, he likes to get up, sit on the seat behind my head, where he could look.
Jacques?
Yeah, Jacques. And I was doing something up on the top of the trailer, patching a leak or something, and had a ladder there. He's down there whining and looking up, and I said, well, come on up. He come up that ladder, but he couldn't go down it.
No, but he was where he wanted to be.
Yeah.
Doing what you're doing. That's.
He really kept track of Mom, though. He'd hear a noise outside, he'd run, and those curtains would come together in the middle. He'd up on this couch and up on the back and stick his nose through that crack in the curtains. The last trip that Margaret and I made to Texas, Johnny Sy, my nephew, was Johnny's boy. He was working for Peter Kiewit down at Winfield, Kansas. We went down there. Well, we come to Denver and then went there first. And that next Sunday, he took us up to Wichita. So it wasn't too far, but out that Boeing plant, past there, and I didn't recognize anything. It's 50 years.
You can't even figure out where you used to live, or you.
Well, when we went to Baggert and Forth to Texas, we'd drive from Denver to Canyon, Texas, and I had a niece that lived there, or not a niece, but a second cousin, and that was one day's drive. The next day, we could make San Antonio, but it would be late, so we usually stayed in Junction, Kansas. So the cheapest motels there we've found anywhere. But from there, then into Amarillo, or not Amarillo, but San Antonio, from San Antonio to Corpus. Then on the way back, I had a cousin that she lived at Lakey, Texas. That's between and south of Junction. And her brother, Barney, in fact, it's his picture there with me. He lives at Iran, Texas. But it's a long drive from Iran up to Canyon. But And on the
Did
way
they-
back, we come back through Denver then.
You lived here on this side of the mountain? How long have you been in the Denver area?
Well, I worked here. I worked for out. We built farm equipment parts.
You were a machinist or you were an assembler or?
Well, we did a little bit of everything, forming the stuff and punching holes, cutting. I cut off an awful lot of steel. I was cutting up a 1/4 by 1.5 bars. That's 21 feet long. And I figured out one day I cut up 1 mile of steel.
You got a torch and
A big shear,
big shear. Dunk.
150-ton shear.
You cut your fingernails with that. Yeah.
Well, another thing, it's going back some, but I worked. I was down in Corpus Christi, and I went to work for a fried chicken, Kentucky Fried Chicken place,
Yeah.
and I cut up the chickens. I used a bandsaw. And I cut up as many as 500 in one day, and I still got all my fingers.
Chickens didn't fare so well, but you still got all your pieces.
Yeah. Well, too, I run a trailer park in Leadville for 2 or 3 years before I went down to Texas.
That was before Wichita, or that was
That's
before
after.
Corpus?
That's after.
After. Okay. Well, that would have been 40s, 50s in Leadville.
That was in the 60s, I think.
60s. The molybdenum, the moly mine was
Yeah. Climax.
climax.
Yeah, just up. They finally shut that outfit down.
I read the story on that where they mine from inside, and you see that the face of that mountain is all settled down, settled in. And
Yeah.
basically, they dug it out from underneath itself like an antlion, like and took that out of there.
You know, a place like that, they had a store there. And I'd heard the story, I don't know if it's true or not, said, what do you think would be the most things stolen out of They said it was toilet paper and wheelbarrows. A guy working, he'd take a wheelbarrow and load it in a pickup right in the broad daylight, and they'd drive away with it.
Oh.
And
So
it
that was
took
pretty
'em-
hot items.
Took them a long time to get onto it.
Right? That's two things you can't live without is wheels and toilet paper. Did you know the Clappers? I guess I'll.
Yeah, I knew Speck and Willard. And
He had a couple of sisters. Willard did.
yeah,
And I saw pictures recently of him growing up, and there's a picture of him with his sisters standing in front of this barn, and he's about as big as man as, he must have been at least 12, 12, and had responsibilities.
yeah. Well, kids back those days they had responsibility to have the ball put in my shoulder. And while I was in there, they discovered that my colon just went to pieces. And I haven't got any colon,
Okay.
period. And those 2 weeks there that I didn't know. I was clear out of it. And the doctor told me, he said, you'll never be any closer to death than you was there. And I've had a close call since I've been here. I had both balls put in, steel balls, and this one got infected, and that infection got so bad that they had to take that ball out. They operated twice to drain it, and then they didn't get it, and they had to take that ball out. I've got a ball in this
So
shoulder.
so it's probably not a good idea to pick you by your shoulder and help you around, or you,
No,
you know,
out there's about high as I could.
Yeah.
I can barely comb my hair.
That's why they got all these gals around here to
Yeah,
make you up.
yeah. It's an expensive place, but one of the smartest things I ever did, I bought some of this extended nursing home care, and that's paying my expenses here for two years or better.
You wonder why you do the things you do, how they pay off later.
Yeah, well, I paid in $30,000 into it, and the last notice I got from them, they'd raised it from $2,780 a year to $3,640. I debated on whether it continued or not, and I thought, well, the way things is going, I better take another year anyway, and to kind of rank and scrape to get it.